Ah, there you go.
Oh, it's always so scary, those things.
It's so always, isn't it? There's a moment where you wonder. Now, hang on, let me see. I might need to move myself back a tiny bit if we're splitting the screen. How's that? Slightly don't have the top of my head. Wait a minute.
You're a pro.
That'll do. Hello, thank you so much for joining us. I am
lovely to meet you.
To be here today with Julia Samuel, and I'm going to give a quick introduction on her and who she is before we get into some quite meaty topics today around grief and other matters. So Julia, hopefully this is the right bio. You are a psychotherapist specializing in grief. You've spent the last 25 years working with bereaved families in both private practices and in the NHS.
30.
In 1994, you worked to launch and establish Child Bereavement UK, where you continue to play a central role today. You were awarded an MBE in 2015, congratulations, for services to bereaved children. And if that wasn't enough, you're the author of 2 books, Grief Works and This Too Shall Pass, Stories of Change, Crisis and Hopeful Beginnings. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, a quick reminder to our audience who should be used to this by now, please do share any questions for Julia or for me in the comments below, and let's get started. So I was super keen to try and cover off this very meaty topic and range of different topics in our AllBright Instagram Live, very regular sessions that we're putting on at the moment for our community, because you understand, Julia, difficult situations, but what we are all dealing with is unlike no other. Or is it? Try and frame a little bit the time in which we find ourselves and how, with your background and experience in dealing with difficult topics, we are feeling, we should be feeling right now.
I mean, I think, you know, that in my book, This Too Shall Pass, the thing I talk about is that change is part of life. We kind of think that we're in charge, but every 7 to 10 years, there's always a sort of big change, and it behoves all of us to learn how to adapt and grow and thrive with the change rather than resist it. The difference with the pandemic is that it's thrown us all into change all at the same time with a virus that we don't understand, that's very new, and so it threatens our sense of safety in our belief system. And I think one of the difficulties in the 21st century is that we think either governments or science and technology can fix things for us. And it's teaching us in a way that we never wanted to be taught, that over some fundamentals in life we have no control. And one of them is birth and death, and the other is how people see us. So we influence them, but fundamentally over the things that matter to us most, we don't have control. And I think the not knowing, when we're used to so much information, I mean, there's so much information about the coronavirus, but I'm not sure I really know much more than I did from the beginning.
Yeah.
I sort of think information is going to solve it for us. And I think it certainly will if they find a vaccine. And I think if we understand something, it helps us in some ways not fight it so much. But the big thing that makes a difference to support and protect oneself in these times is to learn how to support oneself and the people that you're closest to and your colleagues. And that means finding ways of communicating effectively. And often I think the sort of secret of communicating is what you're doing now, is listening. I think people transmit a lot and don't listen that well. And also to kind of find ways of naming what's going on. So I was thinking with families, you could have your own version of a COBRA meeting where you kind of sit around the table and talk about, listen, we're in this together, you know, Easter weekend, we want to go outside, it's the most beautiful weather. What can we do as a family that we can make the most of it, that we can have as nice a time as possible? And what are the things that we're really pissed off about? And name them. And maybe give them marks out of 10. Like I feel out of 10,000 pissed off that I can't go into the park and play football. And maybe we can do other things that are fun, like dance together or, you know, do fun stuff.
how do we deal with things that are out of our control? And I addressed that question a little bit to the AllBright audience of smart-minded, ambitious women who like to be in control and often and generally are in control of their lives. What do we do?
I think the thing, when something frightening happens, that where you, particularly smart, intelligent women, the story they've learned, because what your belief system is from your experience. So their belief system has been, if I work really hard, if I get my head around this, if I acknowledge what I don't know, but get other people to come and help me, then I will succeed. And most of those mechanisms right now don't work. You can't think your way out of it. You can't battle your way out of it. You can't really get other people to come in and help battle with you. So the biggest thing that's happening is that your emotional system has gone on very high alert. It's on fight or flight, because our brains are negatively wired to look for danger. And in this case, we're right. We're in danger. There is a pathogen out there. And so we're on alert. So the thing to help you with control is, first of all, emotional control, that you have a sense of agency. Because when you're locked in, what you don't want to do is to make the situation worse by acting out, losing your temper, using words to destroy someone else when actually you're furious with the virus. And the regular habits help that, to keep your system in a lower gear. I think everyone listening probably has their own kind of toolbox of habits, of exercise, meditation, intentionally doing things that comfort you. And also remember that if you take exercise, it tells your body that you've flown or you've fought. So it reduces the cortisol and it gives you the oxytocin. And then you're in a better position to think about, what can I do given I'm in this situation?
What do we do when we just don't feel like doing that? I speak as someone with sort of freshly washed hair and a dress today. That's not necessarily always been the case unless we happen to be Instagram living. I'm pretty good at getting the exercise out of the way every single day, but then I'm finding it harder to motivate myself actually to be in my normal routine, because my normal routine is all of this.
Put on your metal jacket.
Yeah.
I think give yourself an inducement of a treat. So whether that's a really delicious breakfast, or watching a favorite funny program, or talking to someone that you really love, or so that you give yourself a treat afterwards. The thing with habits is that the more you do them, the more effective they are. And also, when people look back on this, they want to be able to look back on themselves as something that they saw their endurance and their capacity to manage it. And from that, they will get a sense of their own adaptability and strength, which could feel like growth. So it's finding ways of supporting yourself. And also, but on the other hand, when I see pictures of Instagram, people are learning Russian, they're playing the fiddle, they're painting that they've never painted.
What if we don't come out of this completely self-improved? Have we failed?
I think that's completely fine. Completely fine. So set the limits of what you can do. I do think exercise, meditation, and doing something intentionally calming is a must do. The rest, forget it. Be nice to yourself, make sure you have a nice time, connect with friends. That's a huge thing. And self-compassion. So don't beat yourself up. I'm sure a lot of people at AllBright, maybe this is an assumption, are kind of perfectionists because that's work for them. So take that shitty committee critical voice out of your head, put it to one side, and do things that soothe you, that calm you, that kind of make you feel safe, because it is frightening.
Why is change so difficult?
I mean, I could ask you why you think it is. Tell me why you think it is.
Well, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's exciting and challenging and refreshing and the end of boredom and all the rest of it. But I think this type of change, forget even the control factor, but something that's so unbelievably different to the way that we all normally live our life and the choices that we make, it's very hard not to fight against it. And I think it is difficult to feel like your day-to-day life has shifted so much.
I think you're right. So it's a living loss. So it has all the components of grief. So that everything that you knew that was familiar, that you trusted, has been reduced now or broken. And a lot of people face a very uncertain future. So change in this way, the radical change that the sort of the globe is having, feels like they've thrown people into a very unfamiliar landscape, that they don't have the map, they don't know where they're going, and that is very frightening. And what people want is kind of certainty, and you know, it's very much linked to control too. And I think one of the things that really helps that is the serenity prayer. Sort of accept the things that you can change, know the things you can change, accept the things you can't, and have the wisdom to know the difference, because you can keep fighting the fight that you're never going to win.
You're brilliant at giving practical suggestions about things we should do. Can we train ourselves to be better at living with change?
I love the way you talk about train like it's a military operation.
That's me. There you are. I hate seeing I'm talking psychotherapist. My sister is one as well. I'm never allowed to say anything.
I mean, so in both books I've done something called the 8 pillars of strength, and I think having attitudes and ways of being and behaviors that help steady you when you feel thrown, that help you feel grounded, really make a difference. So one of them is your relationship with yourself. So if you're self-compassionate rather than critical, the kind of evidence is that our relationship, having strong relationships in our life, is the predictor of a happy life, much more than sort of ambitions and success. So that we need, when we're hurting, it's the love and connection to others that makes us feel most supported. So that we need to kind of give that a priority. We do the mind body stuff that I talked about, that you recognize your limits. So like you recognizing you're not going to come out learning Russian and doing needlepoint, but somebody else might. So know what your no is and know what your yes is, and that makes your yes much more confident and stronger. That you had structure. So a new structure, not a police state like at 8 o'clock my alarm goes off, but a kind of draft structure, keeping your focus on today. When you project into the future, you can terrify yourself, and people have amazing imaginations that they can make, you know, panoramic films of disaster. So keep your attention to this few hours and today, and give yourself a kind of structure that by the end of the day, I'll have had a good enough day and I can cope with today. So all of those things are giving you balance, because the change makes you go off kilter. We like familiarity, it bores us, and so then we put our head above the parapet and seek something new. But we don't like too much change. We'd like to be in charge of it, that we're in second gear, that we're in a familiar place and we know what we're doing. This has thrown us into a very unfamiliar place. And so it gives us also lots of feelings that we don't like: rage, fury, fear, numbness. And the things that we do to block those feelings are often the things that do us harm. Busyness is an anesthetic, and it's one that all of us use, including me. But if we block our feelings, it narrows our emotional bandwidth. So if you have joy this end and pain this end, if you block the pain, you incrementally also block your capacity to feel joy. So you function fine, but you're a bit like a tin man. If you tap on you, you don't feel much. So then most people talk about feeling nothing is worse than feeling pain. So if you allow the feeling to come through you without resisting it, by getting support from yourself and other people that love you, that is how you change. I can see you looking like, oh, that like, I really don't want to do that. You want a magic pill?
Yes. How do you
do that?
Well, how do we do that? And my second question was going to be, how do we help our children to do that? Which I know is something that I'm struggling with. Got 3 children under the age of 11 at home who are going through their own cycle of grief, who aren't embracing change, who are used to a routine, and friends around them, everything that you've described for us, how do I help to support my children with that?
I mean, I think when we're scared, we become quite childlike. So in a way, what works for us works for children.
Yeah.
So, but the overarching thing is that you know your children best. So whatever I'm saying is in relation to what you believe in your belief system. But the fundamentals is that children of any age, however young, they need the same truth as the adults around them. Because what they don't know, they make up. And what they make up is much more frightening than the truth. So that, you know, even somebody said to me the other day, if you're going to start fooling one section of the population, don't start with the under fives. You know, they pick up so much stuff. And now with social media, you can never, they'll be much more frightened by everything they've read from their friends, from their own screens. So I always start with talking to children by asking them what they know. So don't start by transmitting. Start by saying, what do you know? What do you understand? And then what are your worries? Take their worries seriously. Don't overprotect them by telling them a white lie. Acknowledge what their worry is. Ask them to tell you a bit more. And in as simple and straightforward terms as possible, tell them the truth, that you're worried too. Because really what you model about what's okay and what they can survive is what they will learn how to do. So you are by far, this is a pressure, but it's also the truth. You are by far the biggest influence on their capacity to manage this. And that doesn't mean that you're dressed like that every day, looking hunky-dory, learning Russian. It means that you show them that you can be sad and upset. You allow that to come through your system, and then you get back and you cook them spag bol for supper, and you have a hug, and you watch telly, you cozy up with a duvet, have a cup of hot chocolate, and you feel fine. You know, a bit knackered from crying. So that's what they learn. So with children, it's like what they call it is jumping in and out of puddles. You jump in the puddle, you're very sad. No one stops you like, don't cry, don't cry. They let you let the emotion through your system. Have a cuddle while they're crying, but don't stop them. And then they go off and kick a ball, punch their sister. And that's what we should be doing for ourselves. We've got a lot we can learn from children. And that's what builds resilience, is that you allow, you trust that they trust you because you tell them the truth. Because once they find out you haven't told them the truth, then who do they believe and what can they trust?
Should we talk? Can we talk a little bit about grief?
Yeah.
How do you coach someone dealing with grief in this pandemic situation? Because there are different types of grief, and people are grieving different things. And I am finding there's some very real grief, because people are losing family members, people that they're close to. But I think understanding that absolute panacea of grief and wondering, how do we process that? How do we deal with that? How can we support people who are grieving? How can we give a voice to everybody's grief, even though it feels like some people's grief is more important than others? Frame that a little bit for me in terms of what we can do as friends, as supporters, as a network, as a sisterhood, as we talk about at AllBright, but also does how you deal with grief change, or should it change depending on what you're grieving for?
Not a difficult question or anything.
So
You've
written the books.
I've written the books. I actually do have, I have responses. I don't know that I have answers. I have things that I think. So first of all, that this is a time of grief, but some of it is from death, and others of it is from jobs and money and distance from friends. And so everybody is experiencing grief at a different level. I never think it's helpful to have a hierarchy of grief, that one is worse than another. So to allow each person to have their own experience of it, and that's their unique experience, and to respect and value that. Probably the most important thing you can do when someone is grieving is acknowledge it. So don't try and fix it. When you say, don't worry, you'll get another job, or it'll be all right. with some people that works. With most people, they want to punch your lights out because that
Yeah.
isn't where they're at. I am not okay, and who knows, I'm going to get another job. You don't know, you God, you know. So to acknowledge it and to listen, that is the best thing you can do, and show up. So you know if you're a very close friend, then you show up a lot. If you're a distant friend, maybe you drop some lasagna off, maybe you take the children off. Not now, this is like after lockdown. Do things that are helpful, but also it lasts much longer than we give it credit for. So the whole thing about loss is that the event happens and our feelings of adaptation take much longer to catch up, and that they take longer to process. And so that we need to allow people the time that they take. So sometimes people often hear, 6 months down the line, I think, are you feeling better now? You should be better now. And the thing about grief is that you don't get over grief in the way that my parents used to think about it. They used to think about forget and move on. What we know now is that you accommodate it. It becomes part of you. This phrase that's been used a lot recently, your new normal. So the size of the grief is the size of the level of the loss. So if it's an enormous loss, it feels like all of you has died. Pain is the agent of change. So pain is what forces you to adjust to this new reality that you never chose and never wanted. But by allowing yourself to feel it, not blocking it, you do over time heal. And then you build your life around the whole. So that 10 years down the line, if it's your partner that's died, who died young, for instance, you could revisit it and it can feel like yesterday. But actually you've married again, you may have had another child, you're getting on with your life. So it's a dual process where you grieve and also you get on, and you need to oscillate, allow yourself to do a bit of both. It's called loss orientation, when you have time to grieve and feel the pain. Restoration orientation, where you have time to move on and have plans and have hope and have fun. And you oscillate between the two, and doing one frees you to do the other. Men tend to be restoration oriented, women tend to be loss oriented. So as a couple, you need to support each other to do a bit of both.
Could we try and relate it a little bit to the world of work?
Yeah.
Because I know that this is what our members are often struggling with, the AllBright family listening to this is struggling with. Anna and I are struggling with this. I mean, 3 weeks ago today was definitely the worst day of my working life, and I've been through, I've been at it a while, lots of different things.
Tell me what was so bad about it.
To have to lay off and furlough so many of our staff, to have to break apart this thing that we built. We are so focused on our community, both within the company and externally, trying to live our values, employing 95% women. We've worked really hard on all this, and then
broken, like busted.
Yeah, and it's still sitting here in me every morning. Because that is, to your point on being able to assess my personality type like that, as you witches always can. It wasn't the plan.
No,
we were executing perfectly well on our plan, and then this rains down on us, and you're right, and you're grieving for the thing, you're grieving for your team, you want to know how to support people, you're having to put people's jobs and livelihoods at risk. It feels
devastating.
Yeah. And have we done it right? And how can we support people? And there's an aspect of sort of PTSD that you're still feeling every day when you wake up and you forget what's happened and then you remember. And so, and I know a lot of people are going through different versions of that around work, either as bosses and managers, or people who have been on the receiving end of that and are living in a much more uncertain world. And I think as I reflect upon it and talk to our community about it, it's back to that initial point that it feels unfair, and it feels out of the blue. And so how can, well, I guess that's a very long-winded question, but the point was, how can we do it better? How can it enable us to be better managers? What should we be thinking about? What's the right way into any of this?
So I guess the first thing is that this is incredibly painful. And there isn't a Marie Kondo tidy way of...
I love Marie.
Yeah, exactly.
Apart from the books. I refuse to only have 30 books. But everything else is incredibly neat.
So, you know, you, like me, like everybody listening, we would like to be able to tidy away that real sharp pain in your chest, and the unfairness and the fury and the shock and the loss and the questions and have I done it right? And nobody can do that. So the uncomfortable truth is that you have to allow that process to come through your system and find ways of expressing it. Maybe by journaling, maybe by talking to friends, to colleagues, to partners, and allow the reality of it to sink in. Because when you somehow think that you should be dealing with it better, you're giving yourself the message that you're doing it wrong. Well, actually what you're doing is completely normal and healthy, because it's a sane response to an insane event. And your system is telling you something terrible has happened, and it has happened. And so by allowing yourself to acknowledge that and find ways of expressing it, doing lots and lots of things that support you. So intentionally choosing to see people that support you, doing actions that support you, that you know comfort you, doing your gratitudes, all the kind of things that we talk about, that will bolster you enough to come through the other side. So there was a story in my book, This Too Shall Pass, Cindy, who lost her job, and she was treated unbelievably badly. It was incredibly unfair. She hated everybody. She was furious with everybody. She'd given her life to it in years and experience, and it was kind of robbed from her. And it took her probably 6 or 7 months of being upset, thinking, losing confidence, thinking that she would never kind of get that back. She relied a lot on friends, so friends propped her up. She did things that made her laugh. Laughing switches you to a different system. So if you're feeling really angry, it helps to write down what you're angry about, do some exercise, meditate. And then in my case, I'd watch Modern Family, because it always makes me laugh. And switching your system soothes you. So it's this balancing of allowing both, allowing yourself to feel and express the pain, know that this isn't you doing it wrong or you're abnormal or you're failing, and then doing things that comfort you, which will allow you to heal and come through the other side intact, changed, and maybe even feeling that having survived something like this. So there's something called post-traumatic growth. You will like this. This will suit you, because what the research shows is that traumatic, terrible losses, some people, it never takes away the level of the pain or the enormity of the loss or the meaning. So it doesn't negate that at all, but includes and allows that people find, having come through it, they find that their perception of themselves is changed, that their perception of what matters is changed, that their connection to others is deeper, and that all of that feels like growth. So that rather annoying expression, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, that kind of thing, I find that really diminishing and annoying. But
the entrepreneur's version of that, which is what we're all meant to be feeling, and having had a board meeting this week, is if life gives you lemons, you have to make lemonade. But that can feel like a massive pressure. And some days in the last few weeks, you feel, I don't want to make lemonade. I'm just really pissed off.
But this is way down the line. So where you are now, that isn't where you're at. So the things that you can do is to support yourself with who you are, where you are at, what is going on for you, and access the things, the connections, the people, the ways of being that supports you to keep you afloat each day. That's the best you can do. This isn't about coming out with a PhD. I've learned so much from all the crap. It's like surviving, but and doing it in a way that is self-compassionate. I think one of the awful things about grief, living losses or death, is that people often turn the fury against themselves and they feel guilty. And there's particularly women, all the what ifs in the world. Like if they Sherlock Holmes themselves, looking like, am I being punished for something I did in my past life? If I had looked at this 6 months ago in January with China, could I have done this?
Yeah.
What if? But turn that switch off, that shitty committee critical voice, and be kind to yourself. Like, this is a really painful, really difficult position that you're in. Would you be criticizing somebody else in that way? Would you be saying to them, you idiot, you fool, you... No, you'd be being nice to them. You'd be giving them a hug. And what can I do? And that's what you should be doing to yourself.
Could we talk a little bit more about this too shall pass?
Stories of change, crisis, and hopeful beginnings.
Okay, book for our times. Give us another case study. You gave us Cindy, but give us another one or two that I think people listening will find relevant or useful.
So there were. So it's divided into family, love, work, health, and identity, and I think the two aspects apart from work that are most under pressure are family and love, because again, one of the cruel things about suffering is that we don't become our best self. So that we're hurting and we transmit pain, which puts people off us, but also our capacity to be resilient to, it's like you've had 5 layers of skin taken off you. And so one of the stories, so that you're nasty to the one person who you really need to be nice to. It could be your best friend, it could be your sister, it could be your partner. So one of the stories is a love story in the section on love, where she was really unhappy. She was pissed off. I think it's in family actually. She'd had a baby that she'd really wanted, but she was incredibly torn about going back to work. So she had this ambitious voice that wanted to go back to work and didn't want to be that sort of 65-year-old lady in, doing a sort of rather duff job in a shop. I don't mean that rude about shops, but you know what I mean. She was ambitious, she was clever, but she also wanted to stay home and look after her child. And she didn't want to have this thing of being a bad mother and a bad, ambitious professional. And the pressure was on her relationship with her partner. And the thing that they learned to do was go walking and talking. It was a simple thing. She learned 2 things. She went swimming in Hampstead pools because that took the icy fear out of her system, and it made her feel much stronger because it was so cold. But it gave her courage. Yeah. Made her feel much stronger. And with her husband, they went to the north, walking in the Dales, and they walked and talked, where they could really be honest with each other and stop spitting and shouting at each other, because he was fed up with her because she was sleep deprived and difficult. He was worried about his job. So walking and talking is a brilliant, where your rhythm of being in rhythm together and not having to eyeball each other, like, what are you feeling, always puts people off. But being able to have space and talk when you want to, being in nature, all of that is incredibly curative. And so that's what she learned. And then she found a job. She didn't go for the most difficult job. She went for the halfway house because that kind of fitted who she was right then.
How can we make sure that we're getting on with our husbands at the moment?
You tell me.
Well, I'm all right because my husband is a doctor, he's a surgeon. So I'm in a strange situation where he isn't here because he's at the hospital. But having said all of that, he has his own stuff to process because he's been moved from his speciality to the ICU. But what we're hearing from a lot of our community is that many of us, whether it's husbands or boyfriends or girlfriends or significant others, it's back to this point on what's the normal or the new normal. And we're used to slightly being ships in the night, aren't we, often? And that's how relationships work. And for many people, it's a huge adjustment to have our significant others at home. And
fighting for room space, bandwidth,
Wi-Fi and everything else. Yeah.
I think this idea of, there are no magic answers. You are going to lose it with each other. So this isn't about being perfect. It's about finding the best version that you can be, that you don't kind of tear each other out. So be realistic. But I think the idea of a COBRA meeting on a regular basis, whatever time of day that it is, where you each say what you're finding difficult, what's going okay, what you need from each other, it puts above the table what's hidden below the waterline. And what's hidden below the waterline is often what gets thought about through the finishing the milk, or, you know, whose turn is it to go to Sainsbury's and all of that. So when you actually name it, that helps. I think you can have small little rituals. So one that I got from my daughter actually is, it sounds a bit cheesy, and I don't really like cheesy. I don't really like the woo-woo-ness of therapy, by the way. I'm a bit more kind of disciplined than that. But this really works. It was that as a family, we sit down and one person chooses a song, and then everybody says one gratitude for the end of the day, and then they do a 4-minute meditation. So it takes like 7 minutes, and it marks the end of the day, and it marks a connection to each other, having been fighting over your laptops and working. And then they go into sort of doing supper and having the evening. And it's a very simple, but actually it's incredibly effective, much more powerful than it sounds.
Amazing. I want to say hello to someone who's listening from Argentina, by the way.
Hello.
I've just been alerted to. Amazing. The AllBright power is strong. We made it to Argentina. Please come back. Keep coming. I feel like this one could go on forever, Julia. I'm conscious of your time. I'd love to be back, because I feel like we could do this one again, depending on how long we're all locked down.
Were there any questions there that people wanted?
Is there anything else from anyone else? I've sort of been covering them a bit as we go and passing them off as my own.
Glad you like the domestic COBRA meeting. Good idea.
Thank you from Canada. Amazing. It's amazing doing this, isn't it?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I find the Wi-Fi thingy scary.
Oh, hang on. What's this one? How do you deal with anger?
So anger is an expression of hurt. It's like, oh, you're hurting me. And so if you're aware that the other person is hurting and that's what they're saying, that first of all helps you a bit. And I can see that you're so angry at the loss of control. We're all very angry. The thing, if someone's being angry, isn't to argue the toss at the time, but to acknowledge and reflect back what they're saying. So what I understand you're so furious is that I stopped you using the Wi-Fi because I was on my call, and you saying that I think I'm more important than you. Is that right? So when you don't argue it, but you reflect, it winds someone's anger down. But then what really helps with anger is watching something funny, because it switches your whole system to a different one, and it just calms you down. The other thing with anger is that if you find a way of expressing the hurt, so journaling, writing down what you're angry about, kind of expressing it in that way. Exercise really helps with anger because it reduces the fight or flight that you really want to punch. So do a combination, I've got it in my books actually, a combination of exercise, meditation, journal, and then watch something funny is a very good 4-point system that helps you express anger, but then feel calmer from the expression of it. Because if you just vent, it winds you up and you feel more angry.
I think that's this question that's just come up here, which is, how do we practice accessing pain gradually rather than numbing it or letting it overwhelm you, I guess?
I mean, in some ways, the answer to that is therapy, isn't it? That if you see a therapist once a week, it's the place you go to, the person you go to, where you take the pain, where you're supported, where it allows you to really express it and get it out. And then that in some ways frees you for the rest of the week. On the other side of it is that you can't really, it's like wanting to Marie Kondo your pain, isn't it? So I would find someone that you really trust, that you really like, and talk to them about what that pain feels like. And when you find words for what's incoherent in your system, and you put the two together and you voice it, and it's listened and properly heard, that actually releases the pain. When you block it and try and shut it out with numbness, it builds it up in you. Because it's there to tell your system, wake up, something is happening. You've got to listen to this. And the more you ignore it, the stronger the pain gets.
So another question is about how can we be there for someone who is grieving, a grieving parent or a grieving friend in these very exceptional circumstances. I have a friend who is living in Dubai where the lockdown is really extreme and his father died.
It would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah, quite. His father died last week, and not of COVID-19, but was elderly and been ill for a while, but he can't get back for the funeral. And that is a really, I mean, there's supporting people, but there are also some extraordinary circumstances at the moment, I think, around how people die, the dignity or lack of in their death, our ability to physically grieve, because what do we do about that?
Another simple question. I do think, talking about just about how people die, so dying on an intensive care unit on a respirator with people in PPE suits where there's no family member, for the family member who may watch that on FaceTime or through a screen, is traumatic. And I think they will need proper therapy to deal with the trauma. I don't think they'll be able to process it until we come out the other side of the lockdown, because I think it will stay on alert and kind of in shock and numb in your system until the actual pandemic is eased. In Grief Works, there's a whole section about how to support family and friends. And the main one is acknowledge. So don't try and fix it, is to listen really well. And the other big one is ask your friend what they want. Well, how can I help? What do you need? Is it helpful talking to me? Would you prefer I texted you? So you don't have to come. So the mistake most people make is that they think they have to have the fix. Can't make them feel better, but you can support them given what they do feel, and that will make them feel better. Does that make sense?
It does. Right. I think we're going to leave it there. We can do this again if people want to do this again, if you're happy to do it again. Our next Instagram Live event will be on Tuesday, the 14th of March. So we're giving you Easter off. Although Easter's really like just another day nowadays, isn't it? And it will be Anna and I don't know how we're going to do that. How are we going to do that, AJ? In conversation with our art curator and friend, Beth Greenacre, on artwork in the wake of lockdown. Right.
That's great.
So don't forget to join AllBright Connect if you haven't already on allbrightconnect.com. If you haven't joined it already, why not? And to stay up to date on all of our digital events. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been absolutely one of my favorites. If you have the time and energy, let's do it again.
Yeah.
Thank you
for all your good questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.